Welcome to G Fun Facts Online. What pushes ordinary people, students, professionals, artists to leave their homes and challenge the most powerful figures in their country? It's often a single corrosive force: corruption. Across the globe, from the squares of Bucharest to the streets of Seoul, public protests have become a potent weapon against the abuse of power. These aren't just angry mobs. They are complex social phenomena that can rewrite laws, topple governments, and reshape the future of nations. Today, we're diving into the sociology of anti-corruption to understand how the roar of the crowd becomes the rule of law. So what is the spark that turns individual anger into a collective fire? Sociologists have a few ideas. One way to look at it is through simple math. Game theory suggests corruption can be a kind of prisoner's dilemma, where individuals engage in corrupt acts because they rationally assume everyone else is doing the same. A mass protest completely changes this calculation. Suddenly, the potential cost of being corrupt, public shame, loss of your job, even prison, skyrockets. The risk is no longer worth the reward. But it's deeper than just rational choice. It's about a fundamental violation of public trust. When the very institutions designed to protect citizens are the ones exploiting them, official channels for justice seem blocked. Protests become the emergency exit, a disruptive public demand for institutional reform. It's also a cultural battle. What one person calls a bribe, another might see as a customary gift. Anti-corruption protests are a form of cultural warfare, an attempt to publicly redefine what is and is not acceptable behavior from public officials. To do this, activists must be master storytellers. They use what's called framing to shape the narrative. They diagnose the problem, for example, the system is rigged by corrupt elites, and propose a solution like we need a new anti-corruption law. They frame corruption not just as theft, but as an attack on the nation's soul, its sovereignty, or its democratic future. This powerful, unifying story is what motivates people to act. Okay, so you have thousands of people in the streets. How does that chanting and marching translate into actual, concrete change? There are several key mechanisms. First, and most obviously, protests set the political agenda. They take corruption from a chronic, background problem and turn it into a national crisis that elites can no longer ignore. The sheer sea of people is a threat to a government's legitimacy. It sends a message that the government has lost public confidence, creating a crisis that can force politicians to make concessions. This public pressure can directly lead to legislative and policy change. It creates a political environment where it's more costly for politicians to block anti-corruption measures than to pass them. A perfect example happened in Ukraine. In July 2025, the parliament passed a law seen as undermining the country's key anti-corruption agencies. This triggered immediate, widespread protests, the largest since the war with Russia began. The public outcry, amplified by condemnation from the European Union, created immense pressure. President Zelensky reversed course, and the parliament restored the agency's independence. That's a textbook case of protest directly forcing legislative change. Sometimes, the pressure is so intense it leads to the ultimate form of accountability: the removal of corrupt officials from power. Take the La Linea scandal in Guatemala in 2015. An investigation revealed a massive customs fraud network involving top officials. For months, thousands of Guatemalans from all walks of life held sustained demonstrations. The unrelenting public pressure, combined with the ongoing investigation, led directly to the resignation and then arrest of both Vice President Roxana Baldetti and President Otto Perez Molina. Finally, protests don't just fight the system from the outside, they empower reformers on the inside. The public support generated by a protest can provide the political cover needed for independent prosecutors, judges, and auditors to pursue powerful figures who would otherwise be protected by their connections. In Romania, for example, massive 2017 protests against a decree that would have decriminalized corruption were also a huge show of support for the National Anti-Corruption Directorate, strengthening its hand in prosecuting high-level cases. To see these dynamics in action, let's go on a world tour of people power, starting with South Korea's Candlelight Revolution from 2016 to 2017. This was a masterclass in organized, peaceful protest. The trigger was a shocking scandal involving President Park Geun-hye and her close confidant. What began as small demonstrations swelled into massive, peaceful rallies of millions. A key to its success was a sophisticated alliance of over 130 different civil society organizations, labor unions, and advocacy groups. Instead of competing, they worked together, channeling the public's anger into a single, clear demand: the president's impeachment. The sustained, overwhelming pressure worked. The National Assembly impeached President Park, and she was removed from office. The lesson from South Korea is that unity and organization are protest superpowers. Next, let's go to India and the India Against Corruption movement of 2011. Led by veteran social activist Anna Hazare, the movement mobilized millions in a non-violent campaign for a strong anti-corruption law called the Jan Lokpal Bill, or People's Ombudsman Bill. The movement didn't get the exact, stringent law it had drafted. The government passed a weaker version. However, the sustained pressure was instrumental in establishing a national anti-corruption ombudsman for the first time. Even more, the movement completely reshaped the political landscape. It's widely credited with contributing to the ruling government's electoral defeat in 2014 and the rise of the Aam Aadmi Party, a new political party that emerged directly from the movement's leadership. India's story shows that even when a movement doesn't achieve all its specific goals, it can still trigger fundamental political change. Sometimes the fight isn't about creating something new, but defending what you already have. In Romania in 2017, the government tried to pass an ordinance that would have effectively decriminalized many corruption offenses. It was seen as a direct attack on the country's successful National Anti-Corruption Directorate. In response, hundreds of thousands of Romanians took to the streets, forcing the government to withdraw the decree. The protesters acted like a public immune system, defending a vital organ of the state from attack. It was a similar story in Guatemala, where the 2015 protests were sparked by the work of a UN-backed investigative body, CICIG, which uncovered the La Linea corruption ring. The public mobilized to support the investigators, and their synergy was powerful enough to bring down the president. But these stories also come with warnings. Brazil's Operation Car Wash scandal, which began in 2014, was one of the largest corruption schemes ever uncovered, centered on the state-owned oil company, Petrobras. It was accompanied by massive street protests that supported the investigating judges. The scandal led to the imprisonment of many high-profile figures and the impeachment of a president. However, the movement became deeply politicized. The protests were predominantly directed against the ruling left-wing party, and the anti-corruption narrative became a potent political weapon. The controversy and polarization ultimately helped pave the way for a far-right president who campaigned on an anti-corruption platform. Brazil is a stark reminder that the fight against corruption can be co-opted for partisan ends, with unpredictable and sometimes polarizing consequences. So, anti-corruption protest is a double-edged sword. When does it succeed? The evidence points to a few key factors: a broad, unified coalition that bridges social divides, a clear, compelling message, allies within the state, like an independent judiciary, and a commitment to non-violence. But many movements falter. They face state repression, or they lack a clear political strategy beyond just expressing outrage. And as Brazil showed, the cause can be hijacked. Perhaps the greatest challenge is that corruption is rarely about a few bad apples. It's often an entire system, a kleptocratic network. Removing one leader doesn't dismantle the structure. Furthermore, protests can have unintended consequences, like political instability, or If a movement fails to deliver results, it can lead to widespread cynicism, making it even harder to mobilize people in the future. In the final analysis, the sociology of anti-corruption protest reveals a fundamental truth. Governance is not a one-way street. The collective voice of the people is a formidable force. It can rewrite laws, topple governments, and reshape political culture. The path is fraught with obstacles, and the fight against corruption is a long, arduous war, not a single battle. But public protest is more than just a symptom of bad governance. It is an essential part of the cure. It is the sound of a citizenry that refuses to be silent in the face of injustice, a citizenry that is actively, and often courageously, shaping the future of governance for generations to come.